Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for joining us, Secretary Azar. As a candidate, President Trump talked a big game on lowering drug prices. But after 500 days, the only health care price he has dropped is his former secretary. So while the administration hyped its drug pricing plan as a big step forward to address this broken promise, it is very clearly not. In fact, when President Trump finally announced his big plan to bring drug companies' prices down, their stocks actually went up. Meanwhile, too many families in my home state of Washington and across the country are struggling to make ends meet because of skyrocketing drug prices. Meanwhile, about 1 in 4 people report that someone in their family didn't get a prescription filled because of cost. Meanwhile, about 1 in 4 cancer patients avoided filling a prescription for the same reason. And instead of giving these families a clear plan to address the issue, President Trump gave us a blueprint that is more questions than answers. In fact, the blueprint has 135 questions. That's not a plan, that's a questionnaire. And it left me asking some questions too. For example, where are all the big, bold ideas? Ideas like negotiating drug prices through Medicare, something Democrats and some Republicans have been pushing to make happen for years and could actually have a meaningful impact. As a candidate, President Trump constantly brought up that idea. He told crowds he would negotiate like crazy. He said he could save hundreds of billions of dollars. He said drug companies were getting away with murder, and yet this plan doesn't include that idea or any ideas that would really change the situation for patients struggling to afford the drugs they need. As with so many other issues, President Trump talked a big game in the campaign, and then instead of backing it up, he backed away. And not only did President Trump abandon the idea of having the government negotiate prices through Medicare, he proposed steps that gave pharmacy benefit managers more negotiating power instead. Now, that's not just a 180 from what President Trump said during the campaign. Despite his claim that he was, quote, very much eliminating the middlemen, this proposal to shift payments from Medicare Part B to Part D would have the opposite effect, empowering the companies he calls middlemen without any data to suggest it will bring down prices for our families. And while the big takeaway from this proposal is how little the Trump administration intends to do to address drug prices, in some ways it also reveals how much the administration has not done. For example, I was surprised by the misleading decision to list updating Medicare's drug pricing dashboard as an immediate action, since the dashboard was actually something the Obama administration actually started. The update to the dashboard, released last month, actually should have been released many months ago. And the Trump administration's version actually is missing information that was in the previous one. I got to tell you, as a former preschool teacher, I can tell you even our youngest students know you can't simply turn in someone else's work months late, incomplete, and expect to get extra credit for it. I was surprised reading this section on so-called accomplishments, in which the administration brags about the proposals it included in its latest budget, despite the fact that that budget was an absolute partisan non-starter, despite the fact that many of the policies won't actually do anything for patients, and despite the fact that the budget is only a proposal, not a policy that's been enacted. That's like saying you've served dinner when you've only written a grocery list. And in this case, most of the ingredients on the list are a big nothing burger. The few exceptions are actually ideas that Democrats have been fighting for and congressional Republicans have been fighting against. For example, the idea of requiring drug ads to include prices. Senator Durbin actually introduced a bill with Senator Hassan and others to do this last year, a bill no Republican yet has signed on to co-sponsor. Or the idea of requiring pharmacy benefit managers to pass rebates along to patients. Senator Wyden introduced a bill to do that last year, also without a Republican co-sponsor. Or the idea of preventing generic drug manufacturers from gaming the Food and Drug Administration's regulatory incentives to keep other affordable products off the market. 15 Democrats introduced a bill last year to push for these changes without any Republican co-sponsors. So I'm particularly curious about what our Republican colleagues think about our ideas now and whether they're now ready to join us at the table. There are policies in the blueprint, with which Democrats agree, but make no mistake, those are targeted changes that come nowhere close to solving this very large problem. We need an ambitious plan to drive drug prices down, not one so small that it sends pharmaceutical stocks soaring in relief. I've heard from families across my state about how desperately they need us to address this, and I know many families across the country are in the same boat. In fact, 2 out of every 5 families can't afford a $400 emergency. That means they can't afford drug prices that keep creeping up. The price for Nitrostat, a drug for chest pain, has gone up 29%. Advair for asthma has gone up 15%. And Novolog, an insulin injection, has gone up 10%. Families cannot afford for us to keep waiting for a real plan, which is why Democrats are going to keep fighting for common sense solutions that would actually make a difference, like negotiating lower prices through Medicare. And I also want to take a moment to note that accountability for drug companies isn't just about drug prices. Senator Sanders and several other members of this committee have requested that we hold a hearing with pharmaceutical executives about their role in the opioid crisis, and I think that is an excellent idea. I hope the chairman will work with us on that. I think it's critically important. And finally, Mr. Secretary, while you're here, I do want to express my personal alarm and outrage at the Trump administration's effort to separate families at the border. That's just unacceptable. It is morally reprehensible, and it shouldn't be happening. And I'm deeply concerned about the children impacted by these separations and the crisis that this is actually creating in your department. So I want to be clear, I will have questions about that today as well.